I could shave that down and put on a new mug, but I'm not completely in love with the shape of it. So into the garbage bucket it goes. Hello everyone! As I've been at home, I've been doing more and more pottery projects, and there are some that I just don't like. And when I throw a pot that I don't necessarily love, I chuck it into this bucket here. And I'm going to show you in this video how to take those unfired pieces of pottery and reconstitute them into usable clay. When I'm reconstituting, I use old clay bags, and you have to be careful with that, because if you take out an old clay bag and you open it, you're going to have some dust in the bottom. And you need to be careful not to throw that dust up into the air. So what I'll do is put a little bit of water directly into the bottom of this bag to help with reduce the dust up in the air. Water is going to be an important part of this entire process, so having some in the bottom of that bag is actually pretty important anyway. Because now I'm just going to add in the clay. So when you're adding in big pieces like this, I'll sometimes break them down while they get in there, but honestly after they're sitting in water for a couple of days, they break down anyway. Can you see that in there? Alright. And it is important, if you're working with this, like I was saying earlier, kind of really dry dust, that we don't move too quickly, we don't throw it in, we don't dump it in. I'm just pouring it in slowly right into the water to make sure that it does not blow up a bunch of dust into the air, because that's, you know, dangerous. And while I'm doing this, I'm also wearing a dust mask just in case, and I'll show you my dust mask here. I love this dust mask. It was recommended by John the Potter, and I'll have a link to it in the video description, but it's a really good mask to help so that I'm not breathing in the air. And by the way, I am taking it off while I talk, but it's back on again.
Hey guys, here I am with the mask on. I don't know if you can hear what I'm saying.
So there we have our bag of clay. I put water in the bottom of it. I'm going to let this sit for a couple of days and let that clay kind of reconstitute. It'll become wet, and then we're going to start seeing how it comes together. Now, when I do this, I typically won't fill the bag up. I'll just work with a little bit at a time. And if the water all goes away and it's still dry, I'll add more water. But you want to get it to the point where it is at about this kind of a constitution. So you can see this here, like I can push into it. It's still kind of damp, and that's okay, that's what we want. But with this bag that has been sitting for a couple of days, what happens here is that now I can actually work with this clay. Alright, and this clay has, let me open it up here. It's not usable yet. As you see, there's some chunks that are less moist and less workable, and then this part here is, you can see, really wet over here, and then this is a chunk of clay that's a little bit harder. So it definitely has to be re-kneaded, and that'll be the next step that we do. But one thing I would advise, and this is a process that I do regularly, don't wait until you have like a 50-gallon bucket all filled up. Don't even wait till you have a 5-gallon bucket all filled up. Like this bucket here is now almost empty. And honestly, to keep the dust down, I'm going to put some water in the bottom of this just to kind of mix it up a bit. But I do not wait until I've got 5 or even 50 pounds of clay. I'll work it down to having like this, like 10 or 12 pounds that I can work with, and that way it's a constant process and it doesn't take up a ton of space. I mentioned putting water into this bucket. One time when I reconstituted the clay, I did it entirely in the bucket. I actually put some water in, and it got really moist in there, and then I kind of scooped it out with a scraper. It had a lot less potential for dust when I did that, which was good, but the problem was that it started kind of getting really stinky at the bottom. And if you've ever worked with clay for a long time, you know that smell. So to avoid that, I didn't want to have like a really deep pile of clay again in the bottom of this. But with this one, it's a pretty shallow pile, so I'll probably do that again, put some water in there, and then once it gets to the softened state, pull it out, stick it in a bag, and do it that way. So it's a pretty flexible process. Basically, you're taking dry clay it's either bone dry like this, or it could even be leather hard, any clay that you're not using, and you stick it into water and let it soften again. One tool you definitely need to have while kneading super wet clay is to have a good scraper, because, well, you'll see why here in just a second. Also, for my home studio, I have a bucket of clean water nearby, and that I'm going to use to wash my hands because this is going to get messy. Take my ring off for this. Alright, so here's the clay that has been sitting for a while. Again, we've got chunks of drier stuff and we've got chunks of really wet stuff. So we need to, knead all of this together. And at first, it's going to be really sloppy. And that's okay. Ooh, this might be even a little bit too wet. I might have to leave it out to dry a little bit. When the clay gets to the point where you can work with it pretty easily, one thing that I do, again, I kind of move to dry sections of the table, and I find that it takes the moisture out of the outside of it and really makes it so that the clay quickly becomes where I want it to be, and we are just about there. So I'm just going to keep kind of rotating it to drier sections of the table, and then this is pretty much ready. So now I just knead it, and for this type of clay, again, because there were some hard lumps and some softer lumps, I really over knead it a little bit to make sure that it's consistent throughout. But you can see we've definitely got some usable clay here. That was out of that one bag that you saw I pulled out. So we have now 6 mugs worth of clay from that. So that's about 7.5 pounds. That's about the size I like to work with when reconstituting. It keeps me from getting a big pile of unused clay. And I do have this little bit at the end. I'll use that for when I'm trimming and I need a little bit of extra to just set around my my pot. So there we go. We've got some clay that this morning was in a bag just sitting there, and now it's ready to be used. It's beautiful. Ooh, there's a hair in there. We don't want that. I'm going to leave that out for a little bit let it dry. Ugh. Some projects I just don't like as much as others.